Hello, my name is Leonard. I'm 26, and I live in a small town on the edge of endless cornfields in central Illinois. The kind of place where spring comes soft with pale sunlight filtering through the new green leaves and no rain to spoil the days. I work for a seasonal cleaning service, mostly deep cleans for people moving in or out or folks who just can't handle the dust anymore. It's honest work. I show up, I scrub, I haul, I leave. No one asks questions, and I don't offer answers. I dropped out of community college at 19 when mom got sick. After she passed, dad's health went downhill fast, and the bills piled up. Cleaning pays steady, and it keeps my hands busy so my mind doesn't wander too far. I rent a tiny apartment above the hardware store downtown. It's quiet, that's all I need. One Tuesday morning in early spring, the dispatcher sent me to an old Victorian house on the outskirts. Peeling white paint, wide porch, the kind of place that used to belong to someone's grandparents. The job sheet said, "Deep clean after move-in." The client's name was Brianna. That was all. I pulled up in the company van, grabbed my supplies, and knocked. The door opened almost right away. She stood there, 42, but carrying it like someone who'd forgotten how to rest. Dark hair pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping around her face. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, but there was something sharp in her posture, like she was holding herself together by force of will alone. "You're the cleaner?" Her voice was calm, but clipped. "Yes, ma'am. Leonard." She nodded once and stepped aside. The house smelled of old wood and faint lavender, but mostly dust. Boxes lined the hallway, half unpacked. Pictures leaned against walls, waiting to be hung. Everything felt paused, like the house itself was holding its breath. "Just be careful," she said as I started unloading. "Don't touch anything I haven't pointed out. Those things aren't trash. They're—" She trailed off, eyes flicking to a stack of framed photos on a side table. "They're all I have left." I nodded. "Understood." I started in the living room, vacuuming baseboards, wiping down shelves, moving furniture just enough to get behind it. She stayed nearby, not hovering exactly, but close enough that I felt her watching. Every so often I'd catch her staring at a box or a picture, her fingers tightening on whatever she held. She didn't smile once. By midday I'd moved to the small study at the back of the house. It was the dustiest room, bookshelves packed tight, an old desk buried under papers and knickknacks. On the desk sat a wooden box carved simply, the kind that holds things too fragile for everyday handling. I wiped around it carefully, but when I reached for a cloth on the shelf above, my elbow caught the edge. The box slid. I grabbed for it, too late. It hit the floor with a dull thud. The lid popped open. Old photographs spilled out like cards from a deck. One slid across the wood and stopped at the doorway. I dropped to my knees, heart hammering. The photo that had slid farthest was scratched now. A thin white line across the faces of what looked like a younger Brianna with her parents, all smiling in front of this same house. Footsteps, quick, sharp. She appeared in the doorway and the air changed. Her face went still, eyes fixed on the scattered pictures. Then they lifted to me. "You don't know what respect means, do you?" Her voice was low, trembling at the edges. "You think I hired someone to come in here and destroy the last pieces of my life?" I stayed on my knees, gathering the photos as carefully as I could. My face burned. "I'm sorry, it was an accident. I'll pay for any damage." "Pay!" She laughed once, bitter and short. "You think money fixes this?" She stepped forward, snatched the scratched photo from my hand. For a second, she just stared at it, thumb brushing over the mark like she could erase it. Her shoulders rose and fell too fast. "I asked for help cleaning," she said quietly. "Not for someone to break what's already broken." I had no words. I'd heard worse on jobs, people yelling about scuffed floors or misplaced remotes, but this felt different. This felt personal, like I'd reached into something sacred and left fingerprints. She turned away suddenly, pulling out her phone. I heard her dialing the company, voice tight as she explained the carelessness. I stood in the hallway with my mop bucket at my feet, feeling small in a way I hadn't since I was a kid, getting chewed out for tracking mud into the house. All my life I'd been the guy who fixed things quietly and left. The one people called when they didn't want to deal with mess themselves. I was good at disappearing when the job was done, but standing there, listening to her on the phone, I felt the weight of how invisible I really was. Just the cleaning guy. Just the kid who dropped out. Just someone people felt entitled to snap at because I didn't matter enough to be careful around. I didn't blame her. Not really. Something in her eyes told me that scratch on the photo wasn't about me at all. It was about everything else she'd already lost. But it still hurt. The next morning, I showed up at the same time, same van, same bucket and mop. Part of me expected the company to have pulled me off the job after her call, but the dispatcher just said, "She requested you stay on." No explanation. I didn't ask for one. Brianna opened the door without a word, stepped aside, and went back to whatever she was doing in the kitchen. The air between us felt thick, like the dust I was supposed to be wiping away. I kept my head down, worked slower than usual, double-checking every move. I avoided the study altogether that first day. By the end of the week, I'd cleaned every room except that one. I couldn't put it off forever. When I finally went in, the wooden box was gone from the desk, moved, I guess, to somewhere safer. I wiped the shelves carefully, running the cloth along the spines of old books, feeling like an intruder all over again. Before I left that afternoon, I took the scratched photo I'd kept in my truck, after sneaking it back to scan and reprint a clean copy at the pharmacy, and the rest I'd repaired as best I could with clear tape on the backs. I wrapped the whole box in brown paper, tied it with twine, and set it on the hallway table with a small note in my careful block letters. "Sorry again, ma'am. I fixed what I could. If it's still ruined, I'll pay for a professional to restore them." No trouble meant. I didn't sign it, just left. That night, Brianna sat alone at the kitchen table long after the sun went down. The house was quieter than it had been in years. No husband's footsteps, no child's laughter, just the tick of the old wall clock her mother had loved. She poured herself a glass of wine she didn't really want and stared at the wrapped box on the table. She almost threw it away. Almost. Instead, she untied the twine with fingers that trembled slightly, not from anger now, but from something she couldn't name. She lifted the lid. The photos were arranged neatly, corners aligned. The scratched one sat on top, a new print tucked behind the original like a quiet apology. On the back of the new print in small handwriting, I tried to make it right. Brianna's throat tightened. She hadn't let herself cry since the day she signed the divorce papers. She'd told herself tears were a luxury she couldn't afford if she wanted to keep standing. But sitting there, holding that careful repair in her hands, something cracked open. He didn't have to do this. He could have just shown up, done the job, and disappeared like every other person who'd passed through her life lately. Instead, this boy, this quiet, sunburned boy who barely spoke, had spent his own time and money trying to fix what he'd broken. Not because anyone asked, just because. She set the box on the shelf in the study, higher this time, where no careless elbow could reach. Then she sat on the floor among the half-unpacked boxes and let the tears come, silent and hot for the parents in those photos, for the marriage that had crumbled, for the version of herself she'd buried under layers of control and sharpness. By the next week, the town had its own version of the story. It started at the diner, spread to the school parking lot, reached the hardware store where I bought supplies. "Did you hear? That new teacher out on Oak Road chewed out the cleaning kid so bad she nearly got him fired. Guess he broke something valuable, old family stuff." People looked at me differently when I stopped for coffee. A couple of the guys on other crews stopped joking around when I walked past. Even my supervisor pulled me aside. "Just keep your head down over there, Leonard. No more incidents." I didn't say anything. I just nodded and kept working. One afternoon, Brianna was in the kitchen sorting through a box of old dishes when a sharp edge caught her finger. Blood welled up fast. She hissed, dropped the shard, and pressed a dish towel to it, but the cut was deeper than she thought. I was out back hauling trash bags to the curb when I heard the small sound of pain through the open window. I didn't think. I dropped the bags and came in through the side door. She was at the sink, towel already spotted red. "Let me see," I said quietly. "It's fine." Her voice was tight, defensive again. I didn't push. Just pulled the first aid kit from my work bag, set it on the counter, and waited. After a moment, she held out her hand. I cleaned the cut gently with antiseptic, wrapped it in gauze, my hands careful the way they were when handling fragile glass on a job. She watched my face more than her finger. You don't have to, she said. I know. When I finished, I stepped back, ready to return to work. But she didn't let go of the silence right away. Why did you fix the photos? I shrugged, awkward. Because I broke them. And because they mattered to you. She looked at me for a long time. Something in her eyes softened, just a fraction. Thank you, she said. It was the first time her voice hadn't carried an edge. I nodded and went back outside. Later that night, Brianna unwrapped her bandaged finger and stared at the neat gauze. No one had taken care of her like that in years. Not since her mother's hands had done the same for childhood scrapes. Certainly not her ex-husband, who'd always been too busy or too impatient. She thought about the boy who'd done it without being asked, who'd spoken so softly it was almost hard to hear. There was no agenda in his eyes, no expectation. Just a quiet wish not to cause more pain. For the first time since moving back into this house full of ghosts, Brianna felt something shift inside her chest. Not healed, not yet, but noticed. Seen. And that was more than she'd allowed herself to hope for. The days after that started to feel different, though nothing big changed on the surface. I kept coming at the same time, parking the van out front, hauling in my supplies without a word. Brianna would open the door, nod once, and disappear into another room. But the sharpness was gone from her voice. She didn't watch me like I might break something else at any moment. One morning, while I was on my knees scrubbing the kitchen floor, she came in with 2 mugs of coffee. She set one on the counter near me without speaking. Black, 2 sugars, just how I'd mentioned offhand weeks earlier when she'd asked if I wanted anything. I looked up, surprised. Thank you, I said. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. You've been here almost 3 weeks. Might as well drink something better than the gas station stuff. I took a sip. It was good. Strong, but not bitter. How long have you been doing this kind of work? She asked after a minute. Since I was 19. I kept scrubbing, not looking up. Mom got sick. Dad couldn't keep up with the farm after that. I quit school, started cleaning to cover bills. She was quiet for a long time. I could feel her watching me. That's young to carry all that. I shrugged. Had to. She moved to the table, sat down with her own mug. I used to think I had everything figured out, she said quietly. Good job, stable marriage, this house I'd inherit one day. Then my husband decided I was too wrapped up in my students and meaningless projects to be worth staying for. Said I cared more about other people's kids than building our own life. Her voice stayed even, but I heard the crack underneath. I stopped scrubbing, sat back on my heels. He left because you were busy helping kids? She gave a small, tired laugh. Apparently that made me neglectful. Funny how giving too much to others can make you selfish in someone else's eyes. I didn't know what to say. I'd never been married, never even close. But I knew about being left behind. You don't have to be strong all the time, I said finally. I've seen you after you think I'm gone. Wiping your eyes behind the bookshelf in the study. She froze. Her fingers tightened around the mug. You weren't supposed to see that. I wasn't supposed to break your photos either. Silence stretched between us. Then she nodded just once. The next few days, the questions came slower, but deeper. She'd ask about my dad, how he was doing in the nursing home now. I'd tell her small things, how he still called me by my childhood nickname, how he forgot sometimes that Mom was gone. She'd listen without interrupting, eyes on her hands or out the window. One evening I stayed later than usual. The light was fading outside, turning the cornfields gold. I'd finished the upstairs bathrooms and come down to find her in the study, staring at the shelf where the photo box now sat. I hesitated in the doorway. I fixed them as best I could, I said. The corners are cleaner now. I used a soft cloth on each one. She turned, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. You didn't have to do that. I know. She walked over slowly, picked up the box, opened it. Her fingers traced the edges I'd taped so carefully. These are from when my parents were still alive. Before everything got complicated. I stood there, hands in my pockets, not sure where to look. You know what the worst part is? She said softly. I spent years trying to keep everything perfect. The house, the marriage, the life. And when it all fell apart anyway, I thought it was my fault for not trying harder, for caring too much about the wrong things. She set the box down gently. But you broke something and then spent hours fixing it. Not because anyone made you, just because it mattered. I swallowed. It did matter, to you. She looked at me then, really looked. Not like the difficult client watching the help, like she was seeing me for the first time. Thank you, Leonard. My name in her mouth sounded different, softer. I don't think anyone's tried to see my pain without judging it in a very long time. I felt heat rise in my face. I don't judge. I just know what it's like to feel like you're always the one cleaning up messes nobody else wants to touch. She smiled then, small but real, the first one I'd seen from her. That night, driving home in the dark, I thought about how opposite we were. She was educated, precise, carrying wounds from a life that had looked perfect from the outside. I was the dropout kid with calluses and grease under my nails, carrying quieter hurts that nobody noticed because they expected nothing more from me. But in that house full of dust and memories, something was shifting. The space between us wasn't filled with tension anymore. It was filled with understanding, the kind that doesn't need many words. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. The rumors started small, like whispers through the corn rows in late summer. At first, they were just curious glances when I pulled up in the van. Folks at the diner nodding toward me, saying things like, "That boy's still out at Brianna's place every day." Then it turned sharper. I heard it firsthand one afternoon at the hardware store. Two women from the school board were picking out paint samples. "She's letting that young cleaner hang around an awful lot," one said, "probably just taking advantage of her being alone." The other laughed quietly. "Or maybe she's looking for a little fun after the divorce." I stood there holding a can of varnish, pretending I hadn't heard. But the words stuck, heavy as the dust I brushed off my clothes every evening. At work, the guys on my crew weren't much kinder. "You aiming high, Leonard?" one asked with a smirk while we loaded trucks. "Teacher lady got money from that old house. Careful she doesn't use you up and toss you aside." I didn't answer, just kept stacking boxes, feeling the heat crawl up my neck. I'd spent my whole life being the reliable one nobody really saw. Now suddenly I was visible, and it felt wrong, like being judged for something I hadn't even named yet. Brianna heard it too. I could tell by the way she started closing curtains earlier, or how she'd glance out the window when a car slowed past the house. One day she didn't open the door right away. I knocked twice before she let me in, eyes averted. "We should finish up soon," she said quietly. "The house is almost done." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. The next week, my supervisor called me in. "Got a request to transfer you to the new subdivision crew starting Monday. Steady work, better hours." I knew what it meant. Someone, probably from the rumors, had complained, or the company just wanted to avoid trouble. That evening, I told Brianna while wiping down the porch railings. She was planting flowers in the beds we'd cleared together, small purple ones that reminded her of her mother's garden. "They're moving me," I said. She paused, trowel in hand, dirt on her fingers. "I see." She didn't ask me to stay, didn't say anything more. Just went back to planting, pressing the soil gently around the roots like she was tucking them in. I finished the day in silence, loaded my tools into the van slower than ever. When I looked back, she was standing on the porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching me go. That night, the house felt emptier than it had since I'd moved back in. Brianna wandered from room to room, touching the freshly painted walls, the shelves now organized and dust-free. Everything was clean, orderly, just like she'd wanted. But the quiet pressed in harder than before. She sat in the study with the photo box open on her lap, thumbing through the repaired pictures. The new print of her parents smiled back at her, unmarred now. Leonard's careful work. She thought about how he'd never pushed, never demanded anything. Just showed up day after day with his quiet presence filling spaces she hadn't realized were hollow. And now he was leaving. Not because he wanted to, but because the world outside these walls had decided for them. Tears came then, slow and steady. Not the sharp sobs from the divorce, but something deeper. A grief for what might have been gentle if only people let it be. I didn't sleep that night. Lay in my apartment staring at the ceiling, thinking about her alone in that big house with its memories. I'd fixed what I could, The scratches, the dust, the broken things. But the rumors, the looks, those I couldn't touch. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I called the supervisor and quit the transfer. Told him I'd finish the job I started or nothing. Then I drove back out there, later than usual, sun already low. The porch light was on, even though it wasn't dark yet. I knocked. Brianna opened the door, surprise flickering across her face. She looked tired, eyes a little swollen. I thought, I'm not going, I said. My voice came out rougher than I meant. I don't care what they say in town. I don't need them to understand. I need to be here to see you every day if you'll let me. She stared at me, lips parting like she wanted to argue. Then her face crumpled, not in anger but relief. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I held her there on the porch, her head against my chest, feeling her shake with quiet sobs. I don't want to be alone anymore, she whispered into my shirt. You're not, I said. Not if you don't want to be. We stood like that until the crickets started up in the fields. The world outside could whisper all it wanted. In that narrow doorway with the soft light spilling out behind us, there was just enough room for something real to begin. It wasn't a grand moment. No promises shouted to the sky. Just two people who'd been hurt in different ways choosing not to walk away. And in the sadness of everything we'd lost before, there was this small, steady light, warm enough to see by. A year passed quieter than I ever thought time could move. The old Victorian got a fresh coat of paint. Soft gray with white trim, the way Brianna said her mother always wanted it. I planted flowers along the front walk, purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans that came back stronger every spring. The house didn't look haunted anymore. It looked lived in. I'd quit the cleaning company not long after that night on the porch. Started doing handyman work on my own, fixing porches, patching roofs, the kind of jobs folks in town trusted me with once they saw I showed up on time and didn't overcharge. Word spread slow but steady. I was busy enough to pay bills and still have evenings free. Brianna kept teaching, but she added something new, a free after-school class twice a week for kids who couldn't afford tutors. Reading, math, whatever they needed. The living room turned into a little classroom some afternoons. Small desks I'd built from scrap wood, bookshelves filled with donations. I'd come home to the sound of children laughing as they left, backpacks bouncing. Home. That's what the house became. Not overnight, just gradually, like dust settling the other way. We never made a big announcement, no engagement, no wedding. Town gossip faded when nothing dramatic happened. People saw me mowing the lawn on Saturdays, saw Brianna waving from the porch with a glass of iced tea for me. They figured whatever it wasn't their business anymore. One evening in early fall, I came in from the garage where I'd been fixing the lawnmower, again, and found Brianna in the kitchen, staring at a burnt batch of cookies with the most comically defeated look on her face. "Third try," she said, holding up a tray of charcoal bricks. I followed the recipe exactly. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not at her, at the sight of this precise, organized woman who'd once scared me half to death, now covered in flour, hair escaping her ponytail, looking like a kid who'd been caught making mud pies. She narrowed her eyes, trying to stay serious. "Don't you dare!" But then she started laughing too, real head-back laughter that filled the room. The kind I'd rarely heard from her before. We stood there in the kitchen laughing until our sides hurt, the burnt cookies forgotten on the counter. Later, we sat on the porch steps like we did most nights, iced tea in hand, watching the sun drop behind the cornfields. The air smelled of cut grass and distant rain. "You know," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "I used to think happiness had to be loud. Big gestures, perfect plans. But this is better." I wrapped my arm around her. "Burnt cookies and all? Especially the burnt cookies." She smiled up at me, eyes soft in the fading light. I never thought I'd laugh like that again, not after everything. I thought about the kid I'd been, quiet, head down, always feeling like I was in the way. And here I was, sitting with this woman who'd once seemed so far above me, sharing the kind of easy quiet that only comes when you're truly at home. "Remember when you thought I was just here to break your stuff?" I teased gently. She chuckled. "I was terrible to you. You were hurting. We both were." She reached for my hand, threading her fingers through mine. Her palm was warm, familiar now. I used to think I was just hiring someone to clean the house, she said softly. Turns out I was cleaning out space for something new. For you. I squeezed her hand, and I thought I was just the guy who showed up to work. Never figured someone would want me to stay, not like this. We sat in silence then, the comfortable kind. Crickets started up in the fields. Fireflies blinked on and off like tiny lanterns. Some evenings, Brianna would pull out the photo box, not with sadness anymore, but to show me stories. This was my dad teaching me to ride a bike right here on this porch, she'd say, pointing. I'd listen, adding small comments, feeling like I was being let into pieces of her life I'd never earned but was grateful for anyway. And sometimes I'd tell her about my mom, how she used to make the best apple pie, how dad still asked about her in his clearer moments. Brianna would listen the same way, head tilted, eyes steady. We weren't perfect. She still got sharp when stressed about school budgets. I still left tools scattered in the garage when a job ran long. But we talked. We apologized. We made up with quiet touches and shared coffee on the porch. Happiness didn't crash through the door like in movies. It knocked softly, one repaired photo, one bandaged finger, one burnt cookie at a time, and we let it in. One night, as we turned off the lights and headed upstairs, Brianna paused at the study door. The room was bright now, books organized, a small reading lamp on the desk. I thought I was coming back here to close a chapter, she said, but you helped me start a new one. I pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. We started it together. And that's how it stayed. Two people who'd learned loss young, finding out that second chances don't always look like you expect. Sometimes they look like a quiet house on the edge of cornfields, filled with imperfect cookies, children's laughter in the afternoons, and two hands that fit together just right. The world kept turning outside our windows, but inside we'd built something steady, something ours. And every evening when I came through the door, whether from a job across town or just the garage, and saw her smile waiting, I knew happiness had found us after all. Not because we deserved it more than anyone else, but because we'd finally stopped closing the door when it knocked.